Well, it's just after 9:30, so I'll say good morning to everyone and a warm welcome to this morning's virtual business breakfast with Andy Byford. My name is Mark Challis and I'm one of 10 partners in the Planning, Infrastructure and Public Law team here at BDB Pitmans. Amongst many other things, we specialise in advising on major transport schemes, and we're proud to have worked with TfL on many of its major projects over the years. Now, we're very much looking forward to holding these business breakfast sessions in our new London office near St Paul's, but for obvious reasons, that's not on at the moment. So we have reverted to this online alternative. The format, however, remains a very straightforward format. I shall very shortly ask the Commissioner to speak, and he'll be speaking for about 10 minutes or so. And then there'll be plenty of time for Q&A for the remainder of this 1 hour session. Now, if you want to ask the Commissioner a question, please use the Q&A function, which you'll see there at the bottom of your screen. Do please say who you are and where you are from. But if you really don't want to do that and want to remain anonymous, then that's fine. The chat function is just for any technical problems you might experience. If you use that, we'll try our best to sort out whatever technical problem you might have that we may or may not be aware of. So if I can turn to our speaker this morning, Andy Byford. Andy was appointed Commissioner at TfL in June 2020, so he's still fairly new to the job. Needless to say, he has taken on the role at a time when TfL is facing the most extraordinary challenges in the face of the current and ongoing pandemic. Andy has a very interesting and impressive CV. He started off as a graduate trainee at London Underground, held various positions within LUL, including becoming General Manager of the Bakerloo Central and the Victoria lines. He then moved on to take on senior roles in both South East Trains and then after that Southern Rail, and then went for a complete change of scenery to become the Chief Operating Officer at Railcorp in New South Wales. That's the largest railway system in Australia. And then another change of scenery took him to Toronto to become CEO of the Toronto Transit Commission. And before rejoining TfL last summer, he was president of the New York City Transit Authority. So a man of a great deal of experience of transit systems in major cities. The Commissioner is going to speak to us this morning about how TfL can contribute to the UK's post-COVID recovery. And I'm pleased to say also we're joined by Ed Morris, who is an engagement officer that works alongside the Commissioner. Andy, thank you so much for coming along and speaking to us this morning. We really appreciate it. And if I may, at this point, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you for that kind welcome. It's a shame, absolutely, that we can't be in your new offices. Not that I've seen them yet, but I always enjoy those breakfast sessions. They're always a great opportunity for people to get together, to chat, have a bit of breakfast while listening to a speaker. But hopefully those days will return. You know, we do live in odd times. And as you said in your intro, it's certainly been the most surreal time for me to start this job at TfL. But I guess I've made a bit of a niche of going into tough situations. It was certainly tough at the TTC. There were a lot of customer service challenges back in 2012 when I started, but we took the organization from a real a difficult time, a bit of a laughing stock in terms of customer service. We took it to a position in 2018 of winning the APTA, American Public Transportation Association, Outstanding Transit System of the Year. So I was very proud of my team who delivered that. And New York City Transit, I was only there for a couple of years for various reasons, but we really tore into punctuality. We took punctuality from a woeful, embarrassing sub 60% to over 80% in just 2 years. And we launched the Fast Forward plan, which, although it's somewhat on ice because of COVID, it is the plan to modernize New York City Transit. It's attracted $40 billion of investment, and I'm looking forward to the day when my successors dust that off and deliver it. But now, as you said, here I am back where I started, TfL, back in 1989 as a graduate trainee. I never dreamt that one day I'd return to the top job, namely Commissioner, as we now call it. But straight into it, two main challenges. I set the organization 2 primary objectives, things that we must absolutely focus on, certainly for the early part of my tenure. And no surprises there. They are to lead TfL through and out of the COVID crisis and all that that entails. I'll come back to that point. And secondly, and I see the two as interlinked, to finish off Crossrail and get the Elizabeth line open. And again, I will talk about that. So let's talk about COVID first of all. There's no question, same as with just about everyone watching this this session today, COVID has had a catastrophic, calamitous impact upon many aspects of what we do here at TfL. We saw ridership on the tube. Let's just take the tube as an example. The tube plummeted to ridership levels not seen since the 19th century. It's, you know, at one point we were something like 5% of normal ridership. We're now back up to, in this second lockdown, we're back up to around 19%. But that plus bus ridership of around 30% of normal has decimated our finances. So finances are a real issue. The impact upon the workforce has been awful. We're now up to I think it's as of yesterday, 63 of our colleagues have lost their lives. The majority of whom are bus drivers, which is a terrible thing to even countenance. I never thought I'd be talking about a situation where an organization that I run has lost 63 wonderful human beings who devoted their service to London and Londoners. So may they rest in peace. And certainly one of our big focuses has been to create a safe working environment for them. The impact upon finance has been calamitous. And what this what this virus rather has exposed is an over-reliance, so I would argue a reckless, ultimately over-reliance on fares through the fare box. It's a very unusual situation in that TfL relies to the tune of 72% of its revenue funding for day-to-day operations comes through the fare box. In other words, money that people pay to ride the system. That is unheard of in world transport. My last organization, the MTA and New York City Transit, 38%. Madrid, 49%. You know, the norm's around 40, 45% of income, but we were 72%. And credit to my predecessor, Mike Brown. Mike had taken TfL to a position where, had COVID not occurred, the tube would have broken even. In fact, would have made a small operating profit to offset against the cost of running the buses, and taken out £1 billion in cost over the previous 4 years. So we entered COVID in a good state. We've built up large cash reserves. They're all gone. The ridership plunge has decimated our finances. So we are, in the short term, beholden to government. And we've just submitted what's called the Financial Sustainability Plan to take us back on a path to financial sustainability. But job one for me on arrival was, as I've said, to rebuild the finances of the organization and the morale, and also ultimately the ridership. So in terms of rebuilding ridership, we have put huge effort into 3 primary thrusts, keeping the system cleaner than it's ever been, industrial, hospital grade standard of cleaning, and more visible cleaning and more frequent cleaning of the system. And certainly independent tests by Imperial College have shown that there are no traces of COVID either on surfaces or in the air. So big shout out to the frontline, my frontline colleagues and our contractors. Huge effort gone into cleaning. Huge effort gone into mask enforcement. It's not universal, but it's around 90%, and we continue to really push the message that it's no choice. You've either got to wear a mask or you've got to have a legitimate exemption. And thirdly, a huge effort into maintaining the schedule. Even though we're only at 19% ridership, we must maintain at or near full schedules in order to allow customers to socially distance. So huge effort on that front. Big push on morale. I spend a lot of time out and about on the system, geeing people up, helping our colleagues, looking after each other, getting people through this crisis. And thirdly, the finances. So Mike, my predecessor, negotiated a funding settlement for H1, the first half of the year. Job one for me was to buy ourselves another 6 months, and we duly did that. We got an H2 funding settlement, which allows for up to £1.8 billion in funding on a floating mechanism, whereby if ridership is less than was expected or assumed, we can be made good up to that upper level. And so far, so good. And I should say at this point that I'm very grateful to Her Majesty's government for that funding. We didn't expect a blank check. We didn't get a blank check. There were not unreasonably conditions attached to that funding settlement, but I'm very grateful at the time of so many pressures that HMG listened to our submission, and we've got funding now till the 31st of March. But the real prize is to come up with, and this really is a prize, long-term financial sustainability for TfL. So I want to negotiate with government a 4 to 5 year funding settlement, whereby in the short term, we will still need support. We will need around, we calculate £3 billion for the next year, maybe a bit for the year after. But we see a path to becoming financially self-sufficient, certainly for OPEX, day-to-day operations and maintenance. But that relies on us finding different funding sources, weaning ourselves off such over-reliance on monies through the fare box. So we have proposed some ideas, maybe allow London to retain the vehicle excise duty that London has paid to the tune of 500 million. Maybe set up an outer London cordon charge where non-London registered cars coming into the capital would be asked to pay a contribution again to the quantum of around £500 million. If one or other of those or something else gets approved, then we will be in a position to get back to financial self-sustainability by 23-24, which is government's objective for us. CapEx is a different matter. We will need on an ongoing basis, if we are to contribute to government's objectives, we will need £1.6 billion per year up to 2030. But I argue that is a price worth paying. It's not just funding TfL, it's not just funding London, it is fueling the UK's recovery. So if we can get people to see that funding TfL is not a problem, it's part of the solution, part of the national solution, then I think we'll be in a good place. Because the way we pitched the financial sustainability plan is to say to government, there's three things that I'm hearing that you want. You want shovel-ready infrastructure projects that once they get underway will create jobs and create wealth and get the city and the UK moving again. I can help with that. TfL can help with that. We have plenty of such projects. Number two, government rightly wants to see the UK move to a decarbonised agenda by 2030 and a green-led recovery. We can help with that. Let's electrify. Let's push on with electrifying our bus fleet of 9,500 vehicles. If the UK, if TfL can do that, and there are at least 3 bus manufacturers, I think of manufacturers in Yorkshire, in Surrey, actually in Scotland and Northern Ireland. They would set up a production line for a viable 9,500 strong fleet. And if our buses go first, then the rest of the country can follow. So again, we can tick that box. And thirdly, government want to see a leveled up UK. So do I. It makes sense. But leveling up does not mean saying to London, you've had your share, that's it for you. We're now going to shovel all the money up to the north and the Midlands. No. London generates £39 billion net to the exchequer every year. So it would be facile to say, cut London off and the money will all go to the north. Because my argument would be, well, what money? London needs to be at the center of the economic recovery. If London gets back to full viability, and it only will through a viable transport system, it can continue to generate the funds that can then be put into levelling up. So again, I think we can tick all 3 of those boxes. Those are the big prizes, or that is the big prize for TfL. If we can get fully funded, if we can get a sustainable funding plan that sees us through 5 years, that moves away from this hand-to-mouth 6-month begging bowl, which doesn't do anyone, certainly not someone running a £10 billion organisation, any good, that will be a big win, not just for London, but for the UK. So that's priority number 1. Priority number 2 is to finish Crossrail and to get the Elizabeth line open. And I see those 2 primary priorities as absolutely interlinked. Why? Because what could be a more symbolic, greater symbol of London's renaissance and emergence from COVID than opening the Elizabeth line? These spectacular stations, this amazing line that goes from Shenfield in the east through to Heathrow and Reading in the west? What could symbolise London's phoenix-like rise from the recovery from COVID more than the opening of the Elizabeth line? Frankfurt can't say that, Paris can't say that, New York can't say that. Let's get the Elizabeth line open. So I pushed from day one for TfL to take control of that project. And within 95 days, we achieved that. The Crossrail board did a great job. They've now finished their work, and their outgoing finding was that the central section, which is Liverpool Street to Paddington and a little arm around to Abbey Wood, that because of various further delays would now mean that we need an additional 1.1 billion pounds in order to finish the job off, and it would the first section would open in the first half of 2022. I've publicly committed to no further slippage and no further call on public funding over and above what the Crossrail board set out. But I don't mind telling this audience that I've set my team what I call the triple crown, the triple challenge. And that triple challenge, or triple crown as we're calling it, number one, I want to see us improve on that date of first half of 2022. So although that remains the public position, I've challenged my team to do better. Let's get it finished. Let's get it open. And by the way, open means open. It means all of the stations open. I'll come back to that point. The second challenge is that we should achieve that opening for no more than the additional 825 million, which was the second of two deals that we've struck under my tenure, or on my tenure. That was all funded by the GLA. So let's not go to that 1.1 billion. Let's do it for 825 or less. And thirdly, let's do better than what the Crossrail board also said for connecting end-to-end Shenfield to Heathrow and Reading, which was first half of 23. No, I think we can do better than that. So those are the three challenges that I've set. In terms of opening, mean open, Bond Street was a bit of a laggard. We've brought in specialist advice and support to get the stations finished. So watch this space on all of that. Those are the two big challenges that face me, certainly in the initial part of my job. It is kind of surreal. There's no one about in terms of the offices and out on the system, but I'll finish with this point. I've walked into some challenging situations across my career, and each challenge has been different. I think of Australia for setting up a real customer service ethos, the TTC, where we turned around a difficult situation and won that Transit of the Year award. New York City Transit, emerging from what was called the summer of hell, an absolute customer discontent, 60%, sub 60% punctuality, and we got the job done. This is a different challenge. For starters, I have inherited a superb executive who are very, very capable. So where in my previous organizations I had to rebuild them, not here. But clearly, the big challenge is to recover from COVID, to get TfL back to where it should be, to get the capital city back to motoring and being the economic engine of the UK, and to playing our part into driving the economic renaissance of this country, as exemplified by the opening of the Elizabeth line. So that's it, Mark. That's on my to-do list. Myriad other jobs, opening the Northern Line extension later this summer, Barking Riverside extension. There's huge amounts of stuff going on at TfL. I'm sure some of that will come up in the questions.
Thank you, Andy, for that interesting overview of just some of the challenges that you'll be dealing with. There are some questions coming in. Please put them in the Q&A rather than in the chat function. And so, Andy, I'm going to put the first one to you. This is from John Bebb at TerraQuest. Thanks for your question, John. To the Commissioner, will the ongoing delay to the Elizabeth line, or with the ongoing delay to the Elizabeth line, is the proposed extension to Ebbsfleet realistic?
Well, job one is to get the existing line finished. So what we want, as I mentioned earlier, Shenfield through to Reading and to Heathrow with the spur down to Abbey Wood. That is absolutely job one. That doesn't rule out future extensions, but absolutely job one is to focus on getting the existing proposal, the agreed proposal, a reality. And I have my team fully focused on that. That's why I made it very clear, even in my job interview, it has to come under TfL's jurisdiction, because I think that gives us direct access and it gives us the best possible chance of an early, safe finish. But Ebbsfleet, I'm not ruling that out, but let's get the agreed scheme finished first of all.
Thank you, Andy. I'm going to ask you a question that came in before the session, actually, about the Bakerloo line extension, if I may, which has come from Chris Horn. So, Chris, if you have joined us, I assume you have. Thank you for your question. Can I ask about the proposed Bakerloo line extension from Elephant and Castle via Old Kent Road to Lewisham? Is this still a realistic transport proposal with any chance of seeing the light of day?
Well, let me start by saying we really want to do that. It has huge benefits, as the questioner rightly asked, or rightly mentioned. It would open up a whole swathe of London that's just not served by the tube. You know, the Old Kent Road, Clerkenwell. It's a corridor that really is crying out for an extension of the Bakerloo line, and we really want to get on and do just that. It also opens up huge opportunities in terms of housing. And in terms of commercial revitalization. So I think the case is made. The issue is funding. So with that and Crossrail 2, let's deal with that at the same time. With both of those schemes, at the end of the day, we've got to be realistic. We're not going to get an absolute blank check from government. The financial sustainability plan does seek funding to push on with things like bus electrification and with other schemes, but it does acknowledge that in the short term, some schemes are unlikely to get that funding. So the Bakerloo line extension and Crossrail 2 both fall into that category. They're not cancelled. The work that has been done to date is not wasted. It is effectively put on the shelf, waiting for funding to appear. And we've safeguarded the routes. We've secured the Secretary of State's agreement to safeguard the routes for both of those schemes. So nothing's lost. I really want to push on with them. If we can persuade government to fund the Bakerloo extension, don't get me wrong, we want to do it. We want to modernise and enlarge Elephant and Castle Station, and then we want to push on and make that scheme a reality. But being frank and being upfront with you, right now, it's on the reserve list.
Okay, Andy, thank you. Lots of questions. Thank you. And do keep them coming in. I'll just pick another one out, if I may. This is from Chris Richards at ICE. Thank you, Chris. The financial challenge for urban transport operators is a global one, as you know. Given your extensive network, what approaches from around the world have you seen to help you determine how TfL can recover financially?
Sure. Well, Chris, great question. And I think having had that global perspective certainly helps me contribute to the way TfL recovers from this. And I think the main thing is to diversify away from that over-reliance on fares through the fare box, revenue through the fare box. It really is, it's something that in good times, maybe 72% funding, maybe you can get away with it. Although I also have a view, you can't keep putting the fares up and gouging the customers. There's an elasticity there and a point at which public transport becomes unaffordable. So I think a much better model is to have a diversified income stream whereby you've got other affordable, predictable, sustainable revenue streams, such as maybe those from road user charging, from payroll taxes, from other form of revenue generation that can go into a much better mix. I'd love to get TfL down to say maybe around the 50% or less reliance on fares through the fare box. So certainly I see that as a good model. The other good model, and I'm pleased to see that TfL have already grasped this, is if you look at Hong Kong, the MTR. The MTR is sometimes described as the opposite of most transport organizations, in that some people describe it as a development organization with a transit arm, rather than a transport organization with a development arm. And the reason for that is MTR fund a lot of their extensions in their capital program through allowing overstation development and development of their own land. And it's long been the objective of other transport companies to mirror that, but they just don't have the density of population that somewhere like Kowloon has. Well, London does have a pretty dense population, and I'm glad to see that we do indeed sweat our assets. We don't just have fire sales and sell off car parks and other TfL space. We work with builders such as Black Horse Road, which is happening at the moment, Black Horse Vale it's called, where we're working with a building company to put up beautiful new affordable homes for Londoners, but we retain the freehold and we get the revenue thereby generated. So those would be some examples of how we must spread our risk.
Thank you, Commissioner. A question about experience from around the world. This is from Sarah Wixie what are the key lessons you have learned from your previous organisations that you can use in London? And that, I don't think that's necessarily a question just about financing. It's about
No, no.
anything, I think, that you have
Yeah,
learned
look.
from your travels.
So, well, there's a number of things that you learn. I'll tell you one thing I have learned straight away, and this is, I think, great for the audience. We're good at beating ourselves up in Britain. You know, in the UK, we always assume that everyone does everything better. But let me tell you this. TfL, and sometimes the much maligned TfL in London, TfL is highly regarded internationally. In fact, you look at New South Wales now, the Transport for New South Wales, sounds familiar, right? It's an almost exact mirror of TfL in that it is an integrated transport system, a transport authority. And by integrated, I mean it doesn't just run the obvious modes of subway, bus, and paratrans. It also looks at planning, peace, execution of building in some cases, all the different modes, the marketing and the product generation that goes with it. So it really is an integrated structure. So I actually think we have a lot to teach the world, and certainly a lot of organizations look at how, for example, we use data with the advent of contactless ticketing. But what can we learn from elsewhere? I mean, I look at places like the TTC, the Toronto Transit Commission. If you've never been to Toronto, do go and have a ride on their system. It was built largely, it was actually started in 1921, but it was really came to the fore in the mid-50s when the subway opened. And they have fantastically integrated transport interchanges. So somewhere like St. Clair West, you come off the subway, up an escalator, into a still part of the overall structure, and there's a streetcar waiting in one part of the complex and a bus waiting in the other part of the complex, all under cover, which is pretty important in a country of temperature extremes such as Canada. It's beautiful to see. That's truly integrated transport. And New York City, what I loved about New York, many things, what's not to like, but you know, the brilliant foresight of the people that built that subway, building 4 tracks so that you've got express lines and locals. It is a testament to the vision of the people that built it. New York is also really good at community consultation. I participated in a lot of those sessions myself. So you always have, you always pick up tips from around the world. And equally, we have things that we can help others with, and which is why it's great to have sessions like this where we share ideas.
Thank you very much. Next one, and as I say, lots of questions, keep them coming, please. This is from Mike Pauley at ACOM. Andy, you've discussed sweating existing assets in previous briefings. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, sure. So we should not, and we said this in the FSP, the Financial Sustainability Plan. We shouldn't just have a rush to the fire sale. You know, just say in order to raise some short-term cash, let's just sell everything off that we don't need, because we do have a lot of land actually, and quite often this is land that's difficult for private contractors to redevelop on their own because of the proximity to the transport system and our enduring needs. So a much more enlightened way of going about it is to enter into partnership with us, where we can combine our knowledge of the transport system and what we would still need, and also, for that matter, the actual piece of land, with your expertise at developing and your skills at marketing. It can be a really good marriage of skills. So I certainly see that in terms of sweating assets. Another example of sweating assets would be, you know, I listed the top 2 priorities. I alluded to a few others, Barking Riverside, the bank modernization we're doing. But one that definitely needs to be done is pushing on with fleet replacement. And the obvious next step is the Piccadilly line. And that's good that the PIC is going to get new trains. But right now it's not slated to have new signalling. That was, when I arrived, that was on the reserve list. That would be madness, in my opinion. Why put in brand new trains without upgrading the signalling? So I want to sweat the assets on the PIC. I want to put in CBTC, communications-based train control, maybe with a ultra-wideband overlay to make it quicker and easier to install. And then we really can work the Piccadilly line and increase the trains per hour from you know, in the mid-20s where it currently is to the mid to high 30s. That's what I mean by sweating the assets.
Thank you, Andy. And just you've mentioned a couple of times the financial sustainability plan. So for those of you who have not had the pleasure of reading that document, it really is full of interesting ideas and thoughts about the current situation and what TfL can do to move forwards in the light of it. Andy, here's a sort of different sort of question from Theo de Pincia. Thank you, Theo. What about the passengers? How will TfL entice them back? And what modelling are you doing on timescale, frequency and numbers?
Sure. Well, thanks for the question, Theo. How do we entice them back? There's some push here and there's some pull. So we need to do our bit, which are the types of things that I was talking about earlier. We need to create a safe, clean, controlled environment to entice customers back. No one's going to come onto the system if they think that you'll be crammed in, or that people aren't wearing masks, or that it's dirty or germ ridden, which is why we're putting so much effort into keeping it clean, making sure people are wearing their masks if they're not legitimately exempt, and to maintaining social distancing. Plus getting those independent checks going that I talked about with Imperial College. We're doing a lot of radio ads to make sure that people know that we're ready when they're ready. But ultimately, there is some pull. Unless I engage some press gang squads as used to operate in my adopted hometown of Plymouth, you can't just pull people onto the trains. They've got to want to come, and they've got to want somewhere to go. Offices need to repopulate. If central London businesses have decided that's it for the head office, we're going to set it off to make it apartments, well, that's not something that I can influence. So what TfL needs to do is to really create the environment where, as soon as central London businesses are ready to repopulate their offices and to have people back working again, we're ready. So I think we are, and certainly we're making sure that business knows that we're ready. So that we're ready to meet that challenge. In terms of modelling, we've modelled 5 scenarios. Take a look at the financial sustainability plan that Mark just waved around. It ranges from a very pessimistic model, which basically says that's it, London's done, there's really not going to be much of a return to the business centre, it's going to be all home working and remote working from now on, which we don't think is likely, through to probably an overly optimistic scenario, which says basically, vaccines here, very soon it'll be back to normal, and this will be a dim, distant, nasty memory. Don't think that will be happening either. So we believe that a hybrid model is probably the most likely. There will be some changes to ridership. Probably 80% is as much as we can expect in the short to medium term of a return to ridership. And incidentally, 80% sounds like a lot, but that's 20% of revenue foregone, which is £1 billion a year. So that puts it into stark perspective. But we're certainly modelling all these various scenarios, and we will adjust our service, tweak our service to meet that changed reality. And what I should say is, in that same plan, we actively, openly reject any call for cutting in maintenance or cuts in service. Yeah, the odd tweak makes sense to me, but cutting service and cutting maintenance is a slippery slope and should be avoided. But I hope that answers the question. We have done some modelling. We will get people back, but obviously we're not solely in control of that endeavour.
Commissioner, I'm tempted to ask you a follow-up question, if I may. One of the many lines that caught my eye in the financial sustainability plan is where it says consideration be given to overcrowding not being acceptable to the travelling public in a post-pandemic world. Mm-hmm. So do you think once this is all over, we will not see trains crowded to the extent that they have been? And does that mean an imperative, so far as TfL is concerned, is providing even more capacity, even if there is a massive growth in home working?
Sure. Well, look, I mean, no one's got a crystal ball, least of all us. But I just think socially, one of the enduring outputs or results of the coronavirus is that people probably won't socially accept being absolutely rammed into any situation on a train or anything else for that matter. That I think this probably has had some enduring effect. So it is essential that we maintain our current schedules, B, that we resist any siren calls to slash service, and C, that we do add capacity where we can, which again is back to the back to Crossrail, why I see that as not just a symbol of London's renaissance and re-emergence from COVID. It's actually very necessary, because at the stroke, that will provide 10% more capacity for the tube system, and at a stroke, that will provide much needed relief to our most busy line, namely the central line, east-west through the central core. So yeah, I think the dynamic has changed, Mark. I think that going forward, people will be more nervous about being in these crowded situations. Let's not also forget, you know, once COVID's done, and you know, we all can't wait for the day, is that it? In reality, these things are going to keep coming, right? We've had SARS, we had swine flu, now we've got COVID. I'd love to say that's it for pandemics. I wouldn't like to put my money on it.
Thank you, Andy. Can I go back to funding, and a question from my colleague here at BDB Pitman's, Ian McCulloch. If anyone should understand TfL's funding need, it is surely none other than the Prime Minister, having been Mayor of London. Does the government not see the force of your argument?
I'd like to think they do, actually. And look, at the end of the day, we do know, though, that government has myriad challenges. The country now has a £2 trillion national deficit. That's not to be sniffed at. And the Chancellor must, you know, just wonder where the next wave will come from in this tsunami of challenges that he faces. But I do think government get it. I think sometimes you have to disassociate yourself or separate out the politics and the rhetoric from reality. I think that it's great that we have a Prime Minister who used to be the Mayor of London, who knows very well what a quality organisation TfL is, but furthermore, or more importantly, knows what the contribution of TfL is to London's GDP. And what London's GDP does then for the national exchequer, £39 billion net. So you know, don't be fooled by the politics. There's a lot of rhetoric. Our job is now to work with government behind the scenes, with the DfT, with Treasury, with Number 10, to persuade them of our case. Which is why we pitched it around those three things that government themselves said. I've always believed if you want to win an argument, well, try and frame your own case around what the other side wants. Well, they've made it pretty clear. They want levelling up, a green recovery and infrastructure-led recovery. Tick, tick, tick. We can help with all of those. So let's talk Turkey.
Indeed, and clearly explained, I think, in the financial sustainability plan in a way that's easy to understand, and I think very convincingly put over. I've got a couple of questions here on driverless trains, one from Ben Joss, but there are some others. But Ben, I'll take yours if I may, or ask the Commissioner to. What are your long-term plans for driverless trains on the tube?
Look, we've been asked by government as an outcome of the H2 settlement. We were asked to participate, to cooperate with a panel yet to be struck, but a panel to look at the possibility of driverless trains in the future. So that was actually a requirement. If we wanted the H2 funding, then we've got to go along with it. So at the end of the day, we have done some work on this in the past. It's been looked into. So of course, we wanted the funding, so we are going to cooperate with that. My position is very, very simple. I believe a much greater priority is to re-signal the whole of the subway, those bits that have not yet been re-signaled, and to upgrade the rolling stock. And I think that is a far better use of public money. You know, at the end of the day, we've re-signaled the Northern Line, the Jubilee Line, the Victoria Line. There's a lot more still to do. That's why I'm making this argument for the PIC. So for me, that would be a far greater thing to focus on, because at the end of the day, driverless trains may sound sort of sexy and high tech, and indeed, you know, there's lots of talk about that in the industry, but it's not as easy to achieve as you might think. It's not a question of just buying a train with a couple of or with some sort of automatic button that the train just moves off. The technology does exist, but for the deep level tube, you would need so many safety systems, platform screen doors, probably tunnel vent, because of the spacing of the doors would really affect the piston effect. You probably need to strengthen the platforms. It's not easy to do on curved platforms, so it's not impossible. Would you get the safety case for driverless trains in the deep level tunnel? There's no catwalk in the deep level tube, unlike New York City, by the way. so you have to detrain either ahead or behind. Even with the train captain, that would be a real challenge. So, we're not saying no, we will participate, as that's part of the requirements of the funding agreement. But my very strong position, don't mind repeating it here, is a much better strategy, certainly for now, would be to push on with mass resignaling of the tube and all the benefits that would thereby ensue.
Good, thank you. Very interesting. This is a question about surface transport from Marcus Clissold-Lesser. Thank you, Marcus. Can you comment on future strategy for surface transport, i.e. passenger cars and taxis? Do you see more use of private vehicles? Probably not really what you want to see. And how will you cover electrification and or future self-driving vehicles? So I appreciate there's quite a lot in that question, but over to you, Commissioner.
Okay, so thanks for the question, Marcus. Well, job one for us is well, not just for TfL, for all of us. I'd like to think everyone would agree the worst thing that could happen as a result of coronavirus is a mass return to a car-led recovery. And actually, if people were, say, worried about using public transport, for even more cars to go onto the road than were previously present. Because it's easy to forget what it used to be like. It was pretty gridlocked out there. London was not moving as freely as it should. So it would be a disaster to go back to where we were, or even worse, to go back to a situation that's even worse. So we're very much pushing the public transport agenda. It doesn't all have to be buses and tubes. Under the Mayor's direction and leadership, we have been working on a street space program, which does see more cycle lanes, more ability to walk in a healthy manner, a sustainable manner, but also other modes. I mean, certainly taxis have their place, there's no question. I love using black cabs myself. I think it is the best cab service in the world. It's fantastic. But we certainly cannot afford a return to a car-led recovery. Look at what happened just the other day, the inquest into that tragic death of a young lady up in North London on the North Circular, who for the first time on her death certificate, the primary cause was actually pollution. So another reason why we're pushing on with the ULEZ, the ultra low emission zone scheme then, and the expansion of that scheme. All of these things, all of these are elements in terms of making public transport, walking, cycling. We want to get to 80% of people using those options. We're not saying there's no cars, but 80% of those options by 2030. So I think it's certainly also the case that we're not blind to other developments, such as last mile alternative solutions. Maybe there's a place for autonomous vehicles. Maybe there's a place for partnerships with sort of micro transit users. We're certainly interested in all of that. I think the whole space around autonomous vehicles is really interesting. But as I mentioned in my opener, absolutely part of our strategy is to electrify the bus fleet, with all that entails: changing the vehicles, providing the infrastructure, electrifying the taxi fleet across London. All of those are consistent with driving people onto public transport because it's the reliable, safe, clean way to get around town.
Thank you very much. Next question, really about this sort of changing world on account of the pandemic, and something you've touched on, Commissioner, but a different angle. How is TfL altering its capital programme to respond to the anticipated greater focus upon living and working in the outer suburbs?
Well, again, it's very much a work in progress. There's so many variables here, and that's what the modelling that we put in the FSP aims to try to navigate through. We certainly expect there to be change as a result of COVID, that I could foresee for certain some migration away from central London in terms of office accommodation and office occupation, and for there to be more of a focus on as it's known, the 15-minute centre, or the 50-minute city, and people to be working in the likes of Wimbledon or Croydon, some of the outer centres. So we will have to adjust our service to accommodate that. We will need to look at some of the outer modes, such as the tram network and other elements of the TfL network, the DLR, and make sure that our capital programme is dynamic enough to, in a very changeable situation, to flex so that we do spend scarce taxpayers' pounds in the right place, and not just assume that the status quo will resume and that we just pour money into schemes that will turn into being white elephants. But it is difficult. It's at the moment, we just don't know. Will the vaccine rollout go as well as we hope it will? Will it be completely successful? Will another pandemic emerge? Will businesses choose to move their employees to home working or to somewhere else in the country? We just don't know. But we're certainly not being passive in that regard. We're actively modeling, we're listening to what the CBI is saying, we're talking to business, we're talking to government, we're talking to the likes of London First about the commercial centre of town, and very much ready to roll in terms of application of different capital scenarios.
Perhaps I can ask you a follow-up on that. The different scenarios in the FSP are really interesting, including the so-called remote revolution. But is it fair to ask, when do you think TfL will be able to judge which scenario is the one to go for? Or is that an unanswerable question at the moment?
I think it's too early to say at the moment, Mark. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, as I said, there's lots of variables, but things are becoming clearer. Yeah, it's interesting to see what big business is saying. There are companies out there who are actively saying straight up, we do not intend to repopulate our offices, or we see a 2 or a 3 day week. Others are saying, no, as soon as we can, we're going to get everyone back. Others are saying we're moving out. Government is talking about relocating major departments to elsewhere in the country. So it's a very, very movable feast. But look, what I would say is this, you know, what's my view? London is a world city. Those people who are saying that's it, it's done, you know, the days of mass commuting into central London are over, I don't buy that. I still think London will still attract a lot of interest. I believe in London. I believe that the cultural centre, the financial centre, the business centre will thrive. It definitely will change. It won't be the same as it once was, but it's a very resilient place, London. You look at what London's faced in the past, you know, the Blitz and all sorts of other things, financial shocks. It's always bounced back. It reinvents itself. I look out of my window and I see a sea of cranes. I don't think that's going to suddenly change. I don't believe that London's days are over, not at all. I think that's defeatist. I think there's going to be a difficult few years, but TfL is a massive part of London's heart, and we must play our part in enabling that recovery, and we will. And certainly, I don't want the organisation to just be passive or reactive. We are proactively. That's why we wrote the FSP. Proactively saying what could be done. We could, Mark, have just submitted a simple financial request. This is way more than a financial request. This is a compelling vision of how TfL can be part of the national solution, not just, can we have some money, please?
It's quite, and I think what the plan does very well is explain from a historical as well as current perspective that investment in transport provision in cities invariably makes cities more prosperous, and that case is very well made. Here's a more specific question from Edward Thickness from City AM. Thank you, Edward. The Waterloo and City line is a vital artery for the City of London, yet was not reopened last year when the rest of the tube network was. Will it be reopened at the same time as other lines when the current restrictions are lifted to boost the economic recovery we've actually just been talking about?
Sure. So look, Edward, we recognise the importance of the Waterloo and City line. It absolutely is that great artery between Waterloo and the city, and certainly it's something that we are committed to doing. There's no question that the Waterloo and City line won't reopen. It will. The reason that it's not open at the moment is really a practical one. Number one, there really isn't the ridership right now in the city to justify its opening, but also in parallel, the drivers who work, the operators, train operators who run the Waterloo and City line, also are qualified to run the central line. And the central line is the greater need right now. The ridership on the central line means we have to have every operator we can possibly assign to keep the central line going. And don't forget, TfL is not somehow set in aspic. We're not somehow immune from the ravages of COVID. We also have people off sick. We've lost people, as I said earlier. We've got people sheltering. So we do have staff shortages. So we are prioritizing the central line. I make no apology for that. But we're keeping the situation under very close review. So if you're worried that it won't reopen, I can set your mind at rest. It absolutely will. The only question is when. That can be a decision that we take pretty quickly if the situation changes. But for now, it remains closed for the reasons I just stated.
Good, thank you very much. A question about bridges and cycling bridges. With Cremorne, I think that's pronounced, walking and cycling bridge be one of the shovel-ready jobs you want to put to the Treasury. And our anonymous questioner also says it already has secured planning consent from the local authority, I think.
Sure, I mean, that's the premise of the FSP. I'd have to check the specifics on that one, on that particular project. But we are making a pitch. We're saying, hey, government, if you want shovel-ready projects, we don't have to go away and start, sit then and have a brainstorm about what we could do. We have a lot of good, viable, business case proven projects on the shelf. They're ready to go. We've done the design work in some cases. Look at the Bakerloo and the extension in Crossrail 2, where we've actually safeguarded the routes. But we do know that there are real viable schemes out there, including bridge projects. And so that, again, is part of our submission to government, that if you want to really get London moving, but also you want to get the economy moving with the positive effect that infrastructure projects bring, then talk to us. We've got projects. We're ready to roll. And certainly I see bridge projects as a key part of that, not least because we have a number of other bridges that do require attention, whether they're owned by TfL or whether they're not.
Good, thank you, Commissioner. Another one on funding, lots of questions on funding, as you'd expect. Given the limit on the public purse, Commissioner, do you think that the use of a form of PPP delivery is inevitable? Similar to the approach, says Paul McCracken from Bam Nuttall, taken on Silvertown tunnels. Thank you, Paul.
Well, I wouldn't rule anything out. I'm familiar with the well-documented history of PPPs, particularly that relating to the tube. But at the end of the day, I guess I'm fairly sanguine and pragmatic about where the funding comes from. I mean, obviously, you'd want safeguards. You'd want to make sure that lessons have been learned from the past. But I'm absolutely interested in one thing and one thing only, and that is we must get a long-term, sustainable, affordable, and predictable funding stream for TfL, both for operating, where we must, as I said earlier, diversify our income streams so that we're less reliant on the fare pots, but for capital, so that we can plan with confidence. You can't plan with confidence. You can't get the best value from suppliers. You can't give certainty to your supply chain if you don't have a long-term, agreed capital funding source. So whether that be PPP or all sorts of other vehicles, the one thing is there's one thing that's a constant, and that is you've got to know what your budget is. You've got to be able to plan long term, because a lot of these things take a long time to get to fruition. And I think it's ultimately good financial sense. I think it's false economy to fund TfL in an ad hoc, last minute brinkmanship, gun to the head type way, because it means there's huge uncertainty. Suppliers factor in and price in uncertainty. We've got to achieve long-term partnerships with quality organizations to deliver. And I don't think they're going to sign up if they think we're somehow a bad investment. So PPP is possibly an option. There's plenty of others. As I've said, my job number one is to secure the long-term financial sustainability of this organization.
Thank you, Andy. Another angle on funding, this one from Dave Owen. Dave is the chairman of Pangorum Mediation Services. To what extent does the overrun on Crossrail make it more difficult to convince government to allocate fresh money for other major schemes?
Well, certainly lessons need to be learned. People ask me about that a lot, actually, and I'm able to legitimately say, look, at the end of the day, we do need to have a lessons learned exercise, and we do need to look back and see where Crossrail went wrong, but now's not the time. And you know, I could do that, but wouldn't you rather that I direct the organization to focus on getting it finished and getting it open? Then we'll have the post-mortem. But I take the point. You know, at the I think the real issue with Crossrail was, you know, how could it be that as late as I think summer of 2018, there was still almost a roadshow about come and see how London is able, or the UK is able to build huge projects on time and on budget. You know, come and see the miracle that is Crossrail, only for suddenly their realization to be found that it wasn't running a little bit late. Ultimately, it's running 3 years late, not 2018, not 19, not 20. 2021 or 2022. That can't be right, and that certainly doesn't help anyone's case to get mega funding for future mega projects. So lessons do need to be learned. I think the real lesson learned, certainly from my initial observation, is back then it was seen as a civils project. It's way more than a civils project. The civils went really well. They weren't easy, but they were very well executed. This has always been a much more of a systems integration challenge. That's really what remains to be done. And it's a hugely complex project in terms of digital asset and systems integration. I think the seeds for Crossrail's ultimate late running and going over budget were sown right from the start, and we need to learn from that.
Thank you, Andy. There are a number of questions on Crossrail 2, so perhaps I could just ask you to comment briefly on Crossrail 2. One is from Ben Joss, but there are others. In essence, well, I'll put Ben's question to you. What are your future plans for Crossrail 2? Do you see it coming back online in the future?
I certainly hope so. I mean, I remember back in my tube days, it used to be referred to as the Chelsea Hackney line. Yeah. And certainly that's a corridor that will need more capacity. When you think of the broad route, you know, sort of Waterloo through Euston, King's Cross, there's huge benefits, not only to relief of the central area and the central tube lines, but also, same as Crossrail will have, the existing Crossrail one will have huge positive economic impacts out east in Essex and out west in Berkshire and other counties. If we can get the case or resurrected for Crossrail 2, you think of what that will do to the Surrey economy, to Hertfordshire economy. It's a very, very viable scheme, in my opinion. So certainly, as I said earlier, it's not dead, but it is for now. It's been parked. We're going to stand the team down. They've made the project good in terms of archiving all of what's been done so far, and the route's been safeguarded. But I believe in the scheme. I believe that the scheme will still be needed. I think that this country would be poorly served if, for things like this, I would argue, as other major infrastructure schemes, if you just assume, oh, well, we don't need those anymore now, and then in 10 years' time, you're like, oh, if only we hadn't stopped, if only we'd kept going, that is short-termism. I think we've got to keep going with big schemes, but for now, Crossrail 2, until I know what funding I've got no other choice, it's got to go on the slow burner. I hope to resurrect it.
Thank you, Commissioner. We've got 2 minutes left. I'm tempted just to ask you one last question, if I may, and that, given your experience of working with other transport authorities around the world, is there one thing you think we could take from any one of them to make our own excellent system even better?
I think probably the benefit of relentless investment in the right things, obviously, but investment in the infrastructure, investment in people, and in seeing that public transport actually properly done is a massive economic enabler. And so I would cite, you know, looking at Germany, but particularly a country which is very dear to my heart, love going there, Japan. You look at what's being done in Japan. The Tokyo subway is amazing. The Shinkansen is incredible, and that's been achieved not only through relentless, massive investment in truly reliable, world-class infrastructure, but also in the personnel and the culture of the organization, such that quality and determination to be world-class ooze through the veins of that whole organization. So I'd like to think we're not far off. TfL is a very great organization. Big shout out to my 27,000 colleagues. Big shout out to the contractor staff who are keeping London moving, because at the end of the day, my team have stuck at it. We kept running, just like they said in the war, we kept running. But you can always find room to improve. So that would be my example of an exemplar. Certainly what's being done in Japan is nothing short of a miracle.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you for answering all the questions so well and so openly in the last hour. That brings us to the end of our time. I've really enjoyed the session and hearing all the answers and having received so many questions. So thank you, everybody, for the questions. Thank you, everybody, for attending. But of course, thank you very much, Andy, for sparing some time this morning in your busy diary to come to speak to us, and we all wish you all the very best with all that needs to be done to get TfL through the pandemic and of course beyond to even greater heights. So at this point, I'll thank you again and press the red button. Doing a round of applause on Zoom doesn't really work very well, does it? So I don't think we'll attempt that. But I will end the session at that point. And Commissioner, thank you once again. And thank you everybody once again for joining us. Bye-bye.